Today's game features Jordi Magem Badals playing as white against Mikhail Tal as black. Move 1. White pushes the pawn to e4. Black pushes the pawn to c5. Activity on the queenside. Next, white maneuvers the knight to f3, activating the pieces. Black advances the pawn, a flexible pawn structure. We're at move 5. White pushes the pawn to d4. Interestingly, black pawn takes pawn on d4. It's white's turn. Knight captures pawn. Black continues with advances to a6. White plays activates the bishop early. Black bishop slides to c5. Next, completes minor piece development. A hypermodern approach. And here, black develops the bishop naturally. White knight jumps to c3. Black repositions the knight to c6. Preparing a pawn break. On move 15, white queen shifts to e2. Meanwhile, black supports the center with d6. White bishop moves to e3. Continuing, black brings out the knight to f6. White opts for queenside castling. Meanwhile, pushes the wing pawn, a solid positional move. Now, pushes to g4. Moving forward, pushes forward to b4. And here, white develops the knight to b1, an error in judgment. Black bishop captures bishop. Check. The king is in danger. We're at move 25. White queen takes bishop on e3. Meanwhile, knight takes the pawn. White queen joins the attack, the position remains balanced. Black knight hops to f6. It's white's turn. Queen captures pawn, offering material. Black seizes the open file with the rook, provoking weaknesses. It's white's turn. Queen shifts to h6. Black develops the knight to e5. White continues with knight to d2. Now, black bishop slides to b7. Not the best move. On move 35, white advances to f4. Black knight trades bishop. With check, white pawn captures knight, building pressure. Black repositions the rook. White repositions the queen to h3. Black brings out the queen to b6, a dubious move. At this point, white repositions the rook. Black activates the queen in the endgame. Meanwhile, advances the pawn to f5. Black takes the pawn with the pawn. Move 45. White rook snaps off the pawn, an error in judgment. Black continues with places the bishop on c8. White now plays knight jumps to c4. Black knight takes the pawn. White rook takes queen on b5. Black bishop captures queen, eliminating counterplay. White now plays takes the pawn with the rook, a model endgame performance. Continuing, brings the knight closer to the action. White continues with activates the rook in the endgame. Black responds with knight hops to g4. Move 55. White repositions the knight to b6. Next, cuts off the enemy king with the rook. White responds with brings the knight closer to the action. Demonstrating technique. It's black's turn. Brings the knight closer to the action. Meanwhile, white places the knight on d4. Black continues with moves the king. White advances the pawn to b3. Black places the bishop on e6. Interestingly, white deploys the rook to b8. And check, restricting the opponent's pieces. Black king enters the battle. On move 65, white knight to f4. Black deploys the rook to g4. White knight captures bishop, moving closer to victory. Check, black pawn takes knight, winning material. So, white takes the pawn with the knight, giving check. A candidate move worth considering. Black activates the king. White responds with maneuvers the knight to d8. Black cuts off the enemy king with the rook. Interestingly, white develops the knight to b7, a winning plan emerges. Black activates the rook in the endgame. On move 75, white pushes to d4, a questionable choice. Now, places the knight on d7. Not the best move. White now plays cuts off the enemy king with the rook. With check, black now plays the king becomes active. A terrible oversight. Now, white moves the rook to g2, checking the king. What a blunder. At this point, black steps the king to f6, that's a mistake. White responds with rook swings to f2, and check. A forcing move, black steps the king to g7. It's white's turn. Repositions the rook. Discovering check. An inaccuracy. The game ends in a draw.